What is the key to crying on demand? I have wondered that for years.
Some people like Viola Davis and Denzel Washington have mastered, listen to this, not even the ability to cry, but the ability to crystallize their tears, meaning they just sit there in the crevice of their eye until they want one to roll down. Can you even imagine?
No.
So I don't know that I know the magic. I know that I've tried. There have been occasions where my husband's looked over at me and gone, "What's wrong?" And I'm like, "I'm just practicing. I just had to. So we'd be just driving along, running errands, and I would be thinking about something that brings endearment and warmth to my heart. When we filmed War Room, my grandmother had just passed away. And I'm telling you, I would fix her face in my mind. I would think about her. I would have to skip lunch that day so I wasn't around all the rowdiness of lunch and just sort of be by myself so that I could just be in a tender spot so that when it was time to roll, I had some emotion to build on. But I will tell you, and I'm not ashamed to say this, there is this tricky little, it looks like a tube of lipstick, but it's like menthol. And man, when you get to that 12th take and you've cried every tear you can cry, you can just rub just a little bit of that right in the corner of your eye. And most of the time, if you can just get the sting going.
Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast on YouTube. I'm so glad you've joined us. And hey, if you're new here, subscribe. You'll never miss world-class communicators like Priscilla Shirer and other top leadership experts that I interview. Today's episode is brought to you by OVERFLOW. With OVERFLOW's newest product, Roundups, your church members are able to turn their everyday purchases into incremental donations. You can learn more about the most innovative giving platform for your church by going to overflow.co/Carey and by SUBSPLASH. Out of the 168 hours in a week, how many hours does your church actually have the full attention of your people? Well, that's where SUBSPLASH comes in. You can join 17,000 other churches who partner with SUBSPLASH to go beyond Sunday. Go to subsplash.com/Carey to get $500 off when you sign up. And now Priscilla Shirer and I are going to talk about building your communication skills and what she learned when she became an actor a decade ago. Here's the conversation. Priscilla, I'm thrilled to have you here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So you grew up, I want to start here with your childhood. So Priscilla, as a girl, I think I heard your brother say that you got in trouble for talking too much as a
Totally.
kid. Yeah.
Totally.
What were you talking about? What did you now looking back see? Okay, that might have been God's hand on me.
Well, yeah, I was talking about nothing. That was the problem, was that I was talking about nothing, out of turn, with the wrong tone, all the things. In hindsight, I realized that, many words sometimes are proof of a lack of wisdom. So I'm glad for growth in that way, at least a little bit. But I will tell you, I'd get in trouble for talking, because if the school calls your parents and says, Priscilla's got 2 demerits because today she wouldn't stop talking when it was time to stop talking. Of course, my parents would deal with me in that regard. But I remember in particular, my dad always at some point bringing a conversation back around to the fact that it could be that I had a gift of communications. He would say that to me. I remember being 10 and 11 and 14 and 15 years old and being disciplined, but then him also saying, what if God has given you this ability to communicate? And if you'll just surrender that to him, the thing that's getting you in trouble now could actually be the thing that God is going to use for whatever purposes he has for your life, whether it's in ministry or when I went to college, I thought it was going to be broadcast journalism. I wanted to be on the news. So he's like, well, what if this is what the Lord has given you? You just have to surrender it to him. I've taken that into my own parenting because I realized the patience and discernment that it required for my father not to just be upset that I was being disobedient, but to measure that with a reality that it could actually be pointing to something God-given in this kid. So I've tried to do that with my own boys when they're acting in immaturity or when they're kind of, stubborn or they're risk-taking in a way that is not comfortable for me. After I talk to them about the maturity they need to develop to support whatever that thing is, then I say to them, what if you're a risk taker because God's called you to entrepreneurialism and you're going to have to be the one that's willing to take that risk? Well, what if that stubborn streak is because you're a strong leader? So that leadership potential is actually going to be what you need, but you got to surrender all that to the Lord because either the enemy is going to use it or God's going to use it for his purposes.
I don't know whether you have strong views on the Enneagram or whether you've ever taken an assessment, but do you have any idea what your Enneagram number was?
I have no idea. My sister would know that answer. She's done that, but I have never done it before.
I wonder if it's an 8. 8 are natural born leaders. They sort of take control, not only of the narrative, but of the room. They can often be brash, over the top. But it's also a gift from God, right? When used right. I was talking to my dad the other day, and he's at the stage where he loves telling the same stories over and over again,
Totally.
right? Yeah. And he talks about, I was probably 12, and it was I'd gone to camp and had to give a report. Long story short, there were a couple of people who were speaking that night, and apparently, I don't remember that, but I remember this. The girl who went before me said everything I was going to say. And I leaned over to my dad and I said, she just said everything I was going to say. And he goes, what are you going to do? And I said, don't worry, I'll figure it out. And I just got up there and gave like my 5-10 minute report extemporaneously. And apparently it went off without a hitch. And I was probably around the same age, 11 or 12. And around that time, there were a lot of people in my church who sort of put their hand on my shoulder and said, you're a leader. Like, you're going to do something one day. And when I think about, do I look for that in 11 or 12-year-olds? I think I look for that in 17 or 18-year-olds, but I'm not sure I see it in 11 or 12-year-olds. There might be something there to affirm the gifts earlier and younger if you see them. Any thoughts on that?
I agree. And to make, the thing is making space for them to serve, making space for them to exercise those gifts so that they come to maturity. And I think it says a lot about our trust in God, that everything doesn't need to be perfect, meaning the 11-year-old's going to get there and stumble over their words. They're going to say 800 times. They're going to not know the right way to pronounce the word.
When the whale ate Moses.
Totally.
Exactly.
It's going to be a disaster, but it's like, it's okay. Let them develop. And it's best for them to develop with people that are on their side, that are going to support and encourage them, and are going to continue to call out in them what they probably can't even see it themselves at this point. Give them opportunity to do that. Let them stumble and fail right in the midst of the body of Christ. And then they can come to maturity around people who love them.
So, you're not just a communicator now as an adult. You are a gifted speaker, an author, an evangelist, an actor. I mean, you're in movies. It's crazy to see where your life has gone. And they're not necessarily connected roles normally. Like if you're looking at a career path, they don't all naturally go together. How did you come into these roles? I guess is where I want to start.
Gosh, I got to tell you, I'm just as surprised as anybody that has known me for my life that any of these roles have propped themselves up and have connected themselves. It's been 25 years of just going to the next thing. What is the Lord putting in front of me next? Most of the time, I have done that, pushing past a sense of insecurity that I'm not capable for this task. I can look back on my early 20s when I started to be invited to just speak at little things, 10 women here, 15 women there. I remember feeling like, well, I guess I'm just going to share with them whatever I'm studying in my quiet time, because what else am I going to do? Like, I just felt like I'm not a speaker, so I'll just share that. That's what I did. And then around 24, 25 years old, at one of those little Bible studies, there happened to be somebody there from Moody Publishers. So then I got a call from Moody Publishers saying there was a message you gave. We think that'd be great in writing. My response to them was, I'm not a writer. Ask my English teacher from high school. She'll tell you that I'm not a writer. And they said, we think you could do it. Why not put down a few paragraphs and let's just see. Well, that was the first now of maybe 24 books later. I would have never thought. I still have a hard time considering myself to be a writer because I know people who are writers. This is what they do. So I do know the difference there. And yet the Lord has given me opportunity. To make a long story short, the doors to speak and to write in 25 years, they just never stopped opening. The Lord just keeps giving me opportunity. Most of the time I feel outmatched in those opportunities because here I was at 27, 28 and being invited to speak somewhere where Kay Arthur and Beth Moore are going to be. Well, what in the world am I doing here? So constantly in these positions where I feel in over my head, but I just kept showing up anyway, seeing them as, well, this is what the Lord has put in front of me to do. The same with the films. War Room, which is the first film that I ever did, the Kendrick brothers called me and asked me would I consider it. I said, heck no. Are you kidding me? Because we've all seen movies before that could have been good, except that one actor was tragic and ruined the whole thing. So I actually text them the names of several African-American actresses, real actresses that I knew could handle it. And I thought they were great. I said, call one of these women. They know what they're doing. This is their industry, their field. And they just felt like, no, we just think you need to read the script and just pray about it, because it's not just a movie, it's ministry. It's part and parcel with what you're already doing in your life. So from film to speaking to writing, it literally has been the Lord putting an opportunity in front of me. And the yes or no has been up to me. I cannot do it or do it. But for example, with War Room, if I wouldn't have done it, the impact of War Room would have happened with or without me. 200 million people have seen War Room. That would have happened with or without me. But I would have missed out on the gift of being a part of something that God was using to serve his purposes and to edify his people. I'm the one that would have missed out. That's how I feel about the past 25 years. The things I've said no to, the things God has given me grace to say yes to, it's like, oh gosh, I've gotten to be a part. Despite my deficiencies and my lack of skill or lack of training, I've gotten to be a part of some pretty incredible things that the Lord is doing to serve his purposes. So I'm just stumbling forward. I'm entering into my 50th year. In a few months, I'll be 50. And I'm just looking forward to see, well, what are we doing next, Lord? I'll just keep stumbling forward underneath your grace and we'll see what happens.
It's one thing to be gifted, and I mean, that comes across from your opening words. You clearly have a gift. And it's another thing, though, to get really good at your craft, if you know what I mean. You know, from writing the first book to writing book number 24, 25, being in the first movie, which could be a fluke, versus, okay, well, how do I train in my ability to be excellent at acting? To being on the stage for the first time at 27 with Beth Moore and Kay Arthur, to being a world-renowned evangelist. What are some of the things you've done in these various fields to become, to improve your skill set, if I can put it that way?
Such a great question. I'm glad you asked that. And I will preface my answer just by saying that I do think that question is one that has been lost sometimes in faith-based cultures or structures or systems where we're operating so much on God's grace and everyone needs to serve and all that, which is all true. But also we need to be excellent, whatever it is that we're doing. How can we reach our full potential in honoring God well in our skill and in our craft, whether it's in business or in areas of art, the arts, whatever it is, do it well for the glory of God. One of the things that I will tell you that I think was kind of a mistake that I'm grateful for in hindsight is that I kept being positioned around people who were far further down the road than me. So I got a first-class seat in watching people who knew the nuances of that particular craft. I got to overhear what they were talking about when I was a fly on the wall, because I'm 27 and I'm listening to the 50-year-olds, the 60-year-olds, the 70-year-olds talk about different nuances and how they govern themselves on the stage and off the stage. By being in the writing world just a little bit, well, that means I get to position myself around writers and hear what they're saying, what they're talking about, send them an article, this editor, for example, and he would send me back what his comments would be. I had to be open to criticism. I had to be open to knowing that I was the underdog and finding that to be a gift. It's a gift to be the underdog. It's the gift to be the young one, to be the one who's showing up but knows you don't have all the answers. What a beautiful opportunity to be among these seasoned experts and then glean and get everything you can from watching their example on a platform or from just overhearing their conversation behind closed doors when no one is looking. So part of that desire to pursue excellence, but also gleaning some of the nuances of the skill that I didn't even know I was gleaning simply by being in their space, not being too intimidated just to be around them. Oh man, there's so much value in that. I wish I would have done that more intentionally in my younger years.
So let's take acting as a case study. I'm pretty sure that 99% of the listeners, we have a lot of communicators who listen to this podcast, right? And a lot of authors who listen to this podcast. So we're all familiar with that field. But if somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, Carey, tomorrow you're in a movie, I'd be like, oh my God, like I have no clue. And, you're now doing multiple films. The latest one being The Forge. What have you done? Like that intimidates me. I'm in awe of actors. I'm in awe of actors. Like cry on command. Are you kidding me? I can't cry when it's appropriate. Like, but to cry on command, like, so I'd love for you to break that down a little bit. What did you do to become better at the craft of acting?
Well, one of the first things I did that I was encouraged to do was that Michael Caine, who is, 50 years in the acting business. He has a series of, I think it's on YouTube, but he has a series of courses on acting. I watched them. I listened to them.
Brilliant.
I was leaning all the way in to see what it was that he would suggest and say. There were a couple of books. While I don't think that there are some things you just have to do and you have to engage in. I think acting is one of those, but still you can get some nuances out of just reading about the craft. There were a couple of books that I sort of utilized as a bit of a manual to see what nuances I could gather there. And then I talked to several people where this is their industry, because it's not just about what your face looks like on a camera. There are technical realities that I didn't realize. Blocking, for example, you got to know that you're walking across the room to a certain point, but you can't be looking at the point. You've got to be paying attention to the scene. How do you do that? How do you make sure you're at the point? Or if I'm going to drink this water bottle, when I'm saying this particular word, well, I need to make sure I'm grabbing the water bottle and drinking at that particular word to help the editor in the editing process be able to weave the scenes together.
And make it seem real, right?
And make it seem real. Or if I've got 10 times that we're shooting this one scene because they've got to get all the different angles, how do I not waste my tears on the wide shot, but save those tears for the close-up when they're really going to matter? How do I not cry for some of them, but cry for others of them? I mean, there are all those technicalities that until you're talking to a person. So to answer your question, I specifically made it my business to talk to people who may not be well-known, most of them, but I was able to just ask them a few questions about the technicality of their job. That they were able to give me insight to help me along the way. And then I happened to be on sets where everybody knew I didn't know what I was doing. And there was a lot of grace for that, so that they could kind of help me along the way. And they let me get some on-the-job training. So they threw me right in there. I had to just get after it. But there was a lot of on-the-job training. And I'm a curious person. So I enjoy being in a situation where I'm a student again, where I'm just sitting there like a little schoolgirl with my chin in my hands, watching the nuances of the 3 people in front of the camera, but the 80 people who are behind the camera making this scene come to life. I'm intrigued by all of it. And so it gives me an opportunity to be in that setting where I can learn, where I can gather, and where they know that I might need a do-over so that I can get to that blocking point, for example, and do it the right way. I've been grateful for that.
That gives us a great window into the kind of studiousness you have and the curiosity you have and the desire to get better at your craft. I do want to know, because I don't know the answer to this question. And I'm sure talk to 10 actors, you get 10 different answers. What is the key to crying on demand? I have wondered that for years.
Some people, like Viola Davis and Denzel Washington, have mastered, listen to this, not even the ability to cry, but the ability to crystallize their tears, meaning they just sit there in the crevice of their eye until they want one to roll down. Can you even imagine?
No.
So I don't know that I know the magic. I know that I've tried. There have been occasions where my husband's looked over at me and gone, "What's wrong?" And I'm like, "I'm just practicing. I just had to." So we'd be just driving along, running errands, and I would be thinking about something that brings endearment and warmth to my heart. When we filmed War Room, my grandmother had just passed away. And I'm telling you, I would fix her face in my mind. I would think about her. I would have to skip lunch that day so I wasn't around all the rowdiness of lunch and just sort of be by myself so that I could just be in a tender spot so that when it was time to roll, I had some emotion to build on. But I will tell you, and I'm not ashamed to say this, there is this little tricky little, it looks like a tube of lipstick, but it's like menthol. And man, when you get to that 12th take and you've cried every tear you can cry, you can just rub just a little bit of that right in the corner of your eye. And most of the time, if you can just get the sting going, then you've got it from there. But sometimes you got to prime the pump just to get another tear out of your eye.
Now, okay, that's fantastic. I always wondered that. And they make any other like things you picked up in acting. And I mean, I'm definitely not the guy to do the fake emotional sermon or talk where, you're getting up there and it's like, there's not going to be a dry eye in the place. Oh. That's the opposite of me. But I'm fascinated by how great people master their craft. I'm fascinated by art. I'm fascinated by people who can really act. I'm fascinated by that. Anything else you learned that could be cross-disciplinary, if I know, you know what I mean? Like, War Room was what, 7-8 years ago, 9 years ago? 10 years ago. 10 years ago. Wow.
Can you believe it?
So how has that impacted the other crafts that you carry? Your ability to grow your skill in acting, how has that impacted the rest of your life?
Oh, thanks for asking that. I will tell you one of the main things that comes to my mind is that, in fact, one of the main reasons, there were several reasons why I finally decided to go ahead and step out there and do a film. One of them is that Alex Kendrick, the director of the film, said to me, if you spoke to 1,000 people every weekend for the rest of your life, you will not reach as many people as this one film will. He is correct. To date, probably 200 million people have seen War Room, which means there are people that have come up to me at shopping malls, grocery stores, on airplanes, airports, that I know are not of the same faith or mindset as me. They are Muslim. They are very clearly Hindu, maybe by the way they're dressed or something they say. I can tell that they subscribe to an entirely different faith, which means they would never read a book that I write. They would never come to a conference probably that I'm speaking at. It's a whole different world that they are in. But they're coming up to me to tell me they saw that movie. They're asking me to pray for them. Sometimes in a language I can't understand, but I can tell from their hand movements, they're asking me to pray for them. There is a door that has been opened up for ministry. Gosh, simply because I was given the opportunity and I was willing, and I'm so grateful to the Lord for that, to step outside of my little comfort zone of what ministry should look like and do something different. Because now those same people might pick up a book that they see my name on because they saw me on that movie screen. And it's not the same person. It's not the Bible Belt person. It's not the girl that's been in discipleship and in Bible study all her life. It's someone who's starting from square one, square zero, but they're willing to jump in with me just because they saw me in that genre. So that's what that opening myself up to an entirely different way of doing ministry, it's given me opportunity to minister to an entirely different person.
And hence, tell us a little bit about the new movie that's coming out soon.
Well, The Forge, I hope and think people will be endeared to find that the world of The Forge crosses paths a bit with the world and characters of War Room. So there are going to be some similarities and some threads there that will be endearing, I think, to the audience that loved that film. The Forge really is about discipleship. It's about mentoring and the power of that. I play the single mother of a young man that's 19 years old, and he's kind of just floundering. He's not going to college, and that she's fine with that. But what she's not going to allow him to do is just be on this couch playing video games all day. I loved it because I could hear myself saying that to my 3 sons. I have 3 sons, 21, 19, and 15. And I can totally hear myself saying many of the things that Cynthia says to her son. And really what she's hoping is that there'll be some man that her son's life will cross paths with who will care enough to invest in him, to call out character in him, to call him to responsibility, to elevate his thinking about his future. And God sends, she sees it as God sending a man named Joshua Moore. He is not a vocational minister. He's not a pastor. He is a guy who's a successful entrepreneur. But he sees the young men that work in his very successful business. All of them are opportunities. His eyes are open to say, wait a minute, what else am I supposed to do in this young man's life? What a beautiful lesson that is to me, that all of us, in no matter our area of industry and the workplace, marketplace, whether it's vocational ministry or not, we're all supposed to be disciple makers. There are people in the classroom, there are folks in the doctor's office, there are people in the courtroom, wherever it is that you work. If we'll just say, Lord, open up my eyes to see who you might be sending to me today, that this ain't about the business. This part is about maybe helping them to excel in business as well, but it's also about something I'm supposed to allow them to glean from my life that has to do with virtue and character and with following you. So you get to see a mother's prayer answered, which I've prayed for my own boys, that there will be coaches, principals, professors, people in their workplace that actually care enough about my boys that they want to call the man out of them.
So you've already hinted at this in one of your earlier answers, but I want to go there. Christian movies haven't or Christian entertainment, let's just make it bigger, has not always suffered from excellence. Let's put it that way. All right. Like it's kind of cheesy.
That's a great way to put that.
We're not over suffering from excellence in that department. I think that's beginning to change.
Totally.
What is the difference between, Christian art that, has a good message, but kind of falls down on a number of artistic merits, and just great art in your view? What are some of the key differences?
Well, one of the main differences historically, up until probably the past, if War Room is 10 years old, then I'll say 15 years. Before that, there weren't the dollars there to make the thing excellent. Even if you had excellent filmmakers, if they don't have the backing and the dollars from a production company to allow them to pick or to build the sets that they need, to use the cameras that will bring quality, to have the right lighting so that you can make the scene look crisp and clean. If you don't have the dollars there, then even your best efforts are not going to be able to produce the result that you're looking for. So what we're seeing really, because people have shown up in mass, probably since The Passion, Mel Gibson's The Passion, and then onward from there, there's been great writing, there's been technical excellence, people have been endeared to the films, and they've produced a revenue. That's all the productions companies care about. So once they see that, now they're giving dollars to filmmakers like the Kendrick brothers and the Irwin brothers so that they have a backing underneath them to be able to bring the technical excellence to these projects. So now we're able to see the beauty of what the films can be point blank because there's money behind it to allow them to be at the level they need to be to draw people in.
Well, and that probably makes it a more viable career for truly artistic, imaginary directors and crew who are saying, okay, I don't have to go and work on the latest Hollywood blockbuster. I can actually go work and feed my family in this.
And I'll tell you, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, and one of the most intriguing things that I've noticed on these film sets is that those filmmakers are doing both, meaning there are grips and cameramen and lighting directors and people that I've loved talking to because they're on this set, but they just came off of the latest Spider-Man film set.
Yeah.
And so I get to talk to them about the nuances of what that was like. And they get to talk to me about what they feel is the beauty of being on a set like ours, where they know people are of like mind, where they know nobody's mad that your kids are around. They're going to actually incorporate them into the process, where we're going to pray before the day starts and have a little devotional together. That is a gift to them as much as us having their skill and experience is a gift to us.
Well, we're on the subject of craft, Priscilla, because we do have not maybe a lot of aspiring actors, but we have a lot of communicators, writers listening, and certainly tons of leaders. What are a couple of other skills that you've developed over time that have given you disproportionate returns? In other words, when I learned this or I unlocked this, it just elevated me 2 or 3 levels as a communicator, as a writer, as a leader.
Very good question. The 2 things that come to my mind, the first one sounds a little cliche, and that is less is more. I mean that in every capacity. When I'm speaking, less is more. I remember Zig Ziglar saying to me, this was in my early 20s, Zig Ziglar, the great motivational speaker back in the day, Zig Ziglar said, Priscilla, an audience is going to remember 10% of what you said. So what is the 10% you want them to glean? Say that over and over and over again in different ways. If you take them way deep with all the nuances and layers of things, they're not going to remember any of that. Less is more. Same thing with writing. A great writer is a writer who edits well, who takes a sentence that is way too long and is able to shave word. It's a painful process. Editing is painful because to you, every paragraph is critical. But when you back away from what you've written for a day or two or a week or two, and then you come back to it, when you're brave enough to let other people read it, you're able to start seeing the things that are ancillary and they're actually watering down the poignancy of what you're trying to say because it's too much there. Same could be said true of acting. Less is more. That the small flick of the eye, that the small flick of the side of your mouth where you just want to have a little smirk. You don't have to do it grand like you might on a theater stage, but when it's just you and a camera, less is more and it communicates so deeply. The second thing that came to my mind when you asked that question was that your resources, your greatest resources are in your relationships. So if you are an island unto yourself, if you're not taking advantage of the partnership that God's going to entrust partners to you all along the way. If you're burning bridges because of pride or because you want to do things all on your own, if you're burning those bridges, you are actually burning away the resources that God has given you. Because most doors that I can see that have been opened for me, it's because there was relationship somewhere along the way that was a thread that led to that opportunity. So the greatest resources that I can point to are the relationships that I've had along the way that God has utilized, and hopefully me with them, to be able to weave a web of opportunity for one another and more effectiveness. The Kendrick brothers could write a great movie that requires an African-American female lead. But what they need is a relationship with a potential African-American female lead. I could be a person who could do a role, but if I don't have a connection with film writers who actually are writing something that I want to do, then it doesn't matter. It's the partnership, it's the relationship we have with one another that give each other the opportunity for effectiveness.
So I'd love to drill down on both of those because they're good. And I don't think the first is cliche at all because it's something I still struggle with. I have so much more,
Me
so
too.
much more, so much
Me
more.
too.
But let's start with the second. Let's talk about relationships. So Priscilla, a lot of leaders are just overwhelmed. I mean, we have DMs all over the place. We have everybody who wants a slice of us. And there can be a very tendency, and I can only imagine at your level, where you get pitched every day. So on the one hand, you want to shut it all down and just focus on what you're called to do. On the other hand, when you shut it all down, you potentially truncate some new relationships who are going to lead to something that you might do 2 years from now or 3 years from now. How do you decide who gets in?
Ooh, well, that is an ongoing struggle for all of us, I think, not just me,
Yeah.
but we're all kind of going, how full does my plate need to be until
That's why I
it's
asked
too much?
the question.
I
Yes.
know, right? I will tell you, this is one of the things that probably keeps me closest to the Lord, because I'm serious. I don't say that just to sound spiritual. I'm saying, Lord, would you help me to be able to honor you with my time and with your priorities for me in this season? So, Lord, what are your priorities for me in this season? You know, when all my boys were small, that reality looked a little bit different than now when most of them are out of the door and they're in college now. So those priorities shift, and the filter through which you decide what you can and cannot say yes to, that shifts during different seasons. But I do want to start with that it is a constant asking, Lord, what is your priority for me in this season? So, I think that part of it is I try to filter everything into one channel. That is a hard thing for us because, like you said, people can DM you, they text you, they call you through a friend that they know, they're emailing through different channels. So anytime I'm getting, while I don't respond to all of the nuances, anytime I'm getting something that's kind of coming from left field, I am not answering them. I can't answer them individually and personally. That would cause havoc in the entirety of our schedule and lives. So I'm filtering everybody to one email, which is just in our ministry, one email that Jerry and I can see so that we're able to really look at everything with a clear head and with a clear mind. And then we're looking at our calendar no more than 12 months ahead of time. That was something we learned pretty early on. If I'm planning something 2 years from now, who knows what's happening 2 years from now in our kids' lives, what, championship basketball game they might have that we've now scheduled ourselves out of. 12 months out, though, we can have a little bit of gauge of when their prom's going to be, or, our anniversary is this day, and we need to make sure to block off these dates for that. And then we literally prioritize the things in that year that are going to be important to us in our children's lives, in our lives, and our local church. And I mean, we literally X them off the calendar. And we operate around those priorities. Anything that challenges those priorities, for the most part, it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter how big or great the opportunity is, or that people think it would be the best thing for us to do. If it challenges those priorities, that helps us to be able to, with a clear head, just say no. I have learned to love the word no. I love it because it gives me a yes. That's the way I look at it. The no, even if it's no because there's clear margin on our calendar, that gives me a yes to margin, which means there's a nap that could be taken. There's a novel that could be read. There's mental real estate that I get back for creative purposes, or a walk that I can take, or the surprises that come up in life that oftentimes we don't have any extra time or energy to give towards because we've booked ourselves so solid. I love that in saying no, I get a yes over here that's going to fill up with a kid's soccer game, or somebody's birthday that I forgot, or just a date night for my husband and I. I know that those no's are going to be great yeses on the back end. So just giving ourselves permission to put those priorities in place and use them as our filters. And that helps us to decide right off the bat, 90% of these conflict with those priorities. But that gives us freedom to say no. And then we look at the other 10%. Most of the time, it ends up being 10%. And those 10%, can I tell you, a minute ago, I said to you that one of the greatest things I've learned is that your resources are in your relationships. Most of those 10% we look at through the lens of relationship. Where do we have relationship here, or connection and relationship threads that go towards someone who we are connected with? We want to help to add value to people's visions. If I'm just a speaker because you need a speaker, I'm not the right person for you. There's so many wonderful people that can do that. If you just need an actress, well, there are so many wonderful, more skilled actors than I that can do that. But if there's relationship here, and we know you've got a vision and you're building something, and we can add value to that is unique to what we can offer, then that's something that I want to pay attention to and lean into and devote my time and energy to.
When it comes to less, not more, I think you're right. We all know it, but we're all guilty. And I'm still having a hard time editing, simplifying, and not giving more. 2 questions under that. Number 1, why do you think we all end up doing more, not less? And secondly, how do you know that you've cut enough? So why do we do it? How do you know that you've cut enough?
Man, your questions are amazing. I'm actually
just taking notes.
I'm wondering if you can answer those questions for me.
This is my show. I get to ask the questions, Priscilla.
You do. Okay.
I'm happy to weigh in, but I'd love to hear what you
I would love for you to weigh in,
because
those are things we're learning the rest of our lives.
Same.
Those 2 things. Okay, tell me the two parts of that question again.
Okay, part 1, why do we always think we need to do more?
Yep.
And 2, how do you know when you've cut enough?
Okay. I think that somehow the culture has communicated to us that bigger is better, that amassing more actually in some way adds more value to us. So we have, at the crux of it, tied our significance and our identity to how much, how broad, how wide, how many people are following us, how many events we have booked. But I think the older and older I'm getting, the more I'm realizing that when you have the freedom, both internally, because you don't have guilt and fear demanding things of you, when you have the freedom internally and then the freedom externally with your time or finance or whatever, where you can actually have more space and margin, that to me is the definition of success. But it is antithetical to the culture around us that's just saying bigger is better. So without intentionality, we'll buy into that. We won't even know we have. We'll just look at our schedule one day and it will be completely packed. We'll look at our living spaces one day and it'll be completely full with all the stuff that we've packed into it that now we can't even enjoy our closet anymore because there's so much stuff in there. It just frustrates us. And so isn't that indicative of a lot of areas of our life, our living spaces, our offices, our calendars? Everything's packed. And what's supposed to bring us joy now just brings us frustration because it was never meant to be that full.
Yeah.
So what do you think?
Yeah, I hear that. Like in terms of the calendar, there's the need to feel valuable, the need to feel needed. I think it comes out of that. I think in terms of like content, writing a talk, why do I always want to jam more into a talk? I'm afraid I'm not going to bring enough value. I'm afraid that if I cut too much, that I'm not going to deliver the value that I could. And yet, I listened back to a talk I gave recently and I thought there are too many ideas in 30 minutes. And I know it on the other end.
Yeah.
But when I'm writing and I'm delivering, it's like, there's going to be so much value, so much value, so much value.
Yes.
And the masters really, it's the simplicity of it that makes it memorable.
Agreed.
And so I don't know. I'm very good at critiquing other people for going too long and cramming in too much. I'm a terrible practitioner of the trade. That's my honest take. And I think underneath it for me is a fear that I am not delivering enough value or that people are going to go like, oh, I just thought I'd get more out of that. I don't know. Does that resonate at all?
Oh, it totally resonates. Totally resonates. I think we do too much because we're trying really hard to make sure people think we're important.
Yeah, that is also a factor. Look how smart I am. Look at all the research I did.
Look at all the stuff I have.
Look at all the stuff I have. And when it comes to speaking, public speaking or writing, how do you know that you've cut enough?
Well, I think that for me, I'm still probably pretty old school that, I'm not technologically advanced. So I'm sure some people can use computers way, way better than me. I'm like using Microsoft Word and that's it. And I'm putting at the top of my page what the point is. I am looking at that point throughout the hours it's going to take me to actually develop.
You've got
what
it as a header, so it follows you. Yeah.
Do you see those?
And now we have balloons on the video. I know. It does like thumbs up sometimes, and then it does balloons, but that's cool. We'll leave that in. That's fun. Perfect. It's a live show. Yeah.
Great. So I have that header that I literally type there, or I write it sometimes, and I just let it sit there the entire time. And part of the way that I make sure I don't have too many extras is that I'm constantly asking myself, is what I just put down as an illustration here, as a point here that I want to make? Now, of course, sometimes it's fun to take a little rabbit trail and give somebody like a little bit that is just gold that you want to share with them. But in general, I want to make sure all 3 or 4 of these points come back here very clearly and that I'm saying this main principle at least twice. I'm saying it might be in a different way or in a different form or with a different keyword, but I'm saying this principle at least twice underneath each of these major bullet points that I'm bringing. If I'm not saying it half a dozen times before we get to the end of this message, then I'm too off base because they're really only going to remember that main point.
That's a really good thing. Another metaphor or idiom I've heard, I don't know that you know the work of Seth Godin. He's been on the show a number of times, different circle, but Seth, who's famous. I mean, when you type in Seth in the internet, ends up on his website.
Okay.
So
I'm doing it right away.
He's got a global profile. His posts are very short for the most part. And his formula, he said, is he writes a post and then he cuts all the words until if you cut one more word, it will go to meaning. And then he knows he's done. I'm like, that is a very good challenge, even if you're writing an email or something.
Say that again. He cuts all the words.
He writes what he wants to say.
Yes.
And then he cuts down all the words until cutting one more word ruins the meaning. Like you need that word to communicate your point. Oh yeah. Well, that's why he's Seth Godin, So fun to throw ideas around. Okay, we got a few minutes left. This is going to be a hard turn, but I want to get to it. You're a female leader when you were 11 years old. Your aunt saw something in you and other people saw something in you and publishers saw something in you and they gave you an opportunity. got some listener submitted questions as we were getting ready for this show. And they wanted to know, like, how do we do a better job supporting female leaders moving forward? What can we do to make sure the path is clear?
Well, I know that in different spectrums and spheres of whether it's the church we're talking about, or ministry we're talking about, or business we're talking about, but I think the door has been open wide in all of those spheres to give women a voice, to make sure that their voice is valued, and to make sure that they're seated at the inaugural tables of discussion. Whatever thing is being built, whatever ministry is being built, whatever inaugural discussions are taking place around that entrepreneurial endeavor, you need the perspective that a woman is going to bring. And so space has to be made for those valuable voices to be there. And then when their perspective is shared, to actually make sure that that is part and parcel with the framework of whatever that system or that institution is that is being built. And I think the framework in these last few years in particular has been, the table's been laid for that. And now I think we have to keep having people that are having this conversation, and then people that are champions to make sure that that doesn't diminish, but continues to escalate in years to come.
So, Priscilla, anything we didn't touch on that you'd like to touch on before we wrap up?
Did we talk at all about the movie? We did talk about the movie.
We talked about the Forge.
We got to tell people to go see it.
You got to go see the movie. Yeah. You got a latest book, one of 24, called I Surrender All. And for all things Priscilla these days online, where can people find you?
Well, my last name's kind of weird. It's Shirer. So if you just go to @Priscilla Shirer, you'll find me there. Just nothing real deep, but just some fun and some encouragement centered on the Word of God. And I hope it's a blessing to people who stop by.
Priscilla, I got to tell you, this has been a fascinating conversation and a lot of fun. I want to thank you so much.
Hey, thank you. And I have to tell you the same thing. This has been one of the most insightful and engaging conversations I've had. And I'm just so grateful, seriously, that you give me the opportunity.
Thank you, Priscilla.